getting stuff done is important. It's the most visible outcome in a way. But the building relationship with the people around you is extremely important in order to get stuff done.
Hey everyone, Gordon here. Thanks for joining us on the Get Stuff Done podcast. If you're with us for the first time, a very warm welcome. If you're a regular listener, well, thanks so much for coming back. You found out your way to the How to Get Stuff Done series. In this series, through our guests' experiences and sharing of their insights, we learn how they get stuff done, how they have got to where they are today by sharing some of their techniques and strategies for doing so. I hope you find it both interesting and insightful, but also practical at the same time. Now let's see who our guest is today. Hello everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of the Get Stuff Done podcast. I'm your host, Gordon Dudley, and today I am absolutely delighted to join our guest, Christel Adamou. Actually, Christel has been a former guest of mine in a number of years ago when we had an event called the People Matters event. Some of you who might have been with us at that time might remember that, and it's great to have her back again. Let me tell you a little bit about Christel and why she is a guest with us today. So Christel was born in France to a Cameroonian father and a French Vietnamese mother. She is an international lawyer, linguist, and also holds an MBA. She has been in a number of international organizational roles, specifically within HR, namely with the UN in Haiti and also at the Global Green Growth Institute in Seoul, in Korea, and also the Asian Development Bank in the Director of Office of Professional Ethics and Conduct. So she has also a couple of other hats that she wears as a board member, and she was also the recipient of the Professional Achievement Award from the British Council Study UK Europe in 2021. So she has a diverse background, an international background, and I think she can provide a lot of insights for us around getting stuff done. So Christel, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Gordon. Thank you very much.
And let me first of all ask, where are you located today? Where are we talking to you from?
I'm currently in my home in Paris.
Okay.
It's winter time. And that's why I'm wearing so much clothes. It's good.
Indeed. And so we did first meet through connections in Korea, and we're now both outside of Korea. But it's great to see you again. Thanks for coming back. So I'm going to jump in with the question that I like to ask all of my guests straight off the bat. The first question is the title of the podcast, Getting Stuff Done. How do you go about getting stuff done?
Okay. Well, pretty much like everybody else, I look at the process of getting stuff done. And I'm also a multitasker, so I've done quite a few things at the same time. But more recently, over the years, I've started thinking about putting the why of getting stuff done first and foremost. I have to say, I haven't thought about it much more before I entered leadership roles. But asking myself why I'm getting stuff done has actually been a trigger on getting things done more effectively and with more meaning. So why am I doing some stuff? Why are other people are doing some stuff? And as a sort of a line towards thinking more strategically about getting stuff done. So it's not something I've thought about it a lot before a few years ago, but now that it's really driving my thought process on what I want to get stuff done.
And so you mentioned about that difference between getting stuff done with regards to others. How does that play out in practice for you? Or what is it maybe that you do differently when you're doing something yourself versus trying to initiate others to get stuff done?
Well, we all want to get stuff done, and we also all have different agendas, different priorities and objectives behind moving agendas forward. However, we don't work alone. You work with other departments, other stakeholders, and thinking about what they also want to get done and at what timing they also want to get this done is extremely important to drive your own agenda. So whether you're with a team and also with other stakeholders towards a bigger role or mission or any other projects, thinking about why we're doing this, how does it fit with the others' priorities, and looking at how do we fit within that is actually very helpful to work together towards some results. Within the team, I find myself to be more of an enabler in general. So trying to understand what their strengths are, as well as where maybe they would have some room for improvement or learning or development is critical. And again, you have to go towards understanding why people do things, how they fit within others' agendas and priorities, and what's the bigger picture in general. So yes, just in general, I've been thinking about that question for some time. Before, I used to think about in a silo way, I need to get this done. What are the steps? The journey, the process of getting things done. But over time, I realized that I really need to develop the why, even for myself, to understand why we're doing this, what problem we're trying to solve, and how does it work with the other departments or the other stakeholders in order to, like music, you have different notes and then you move along together towards creating music, right? So that's how I see it now.
Yeah, it's almost like we see the fastest point from A to B ourselves is just like a straight line. But when it comes to stakeholders or others, teams, like you mentioned, there's so many more other factors that come into play that actually that straight line is not the fastest way to get to the result. And so I think timing that you mentioned there is also really underrated factor, getting stuff done with regards to organizations, because a message at a certain time, it will have a totally different impact to sending it at another time. Just
Absolutely.
because time changes so many elements. And I think that's one thing that I learned early on when I first had people to manage. At first, I just thought, well, I'm the one in charge. I need to do it as quickly as possible. So as soon as I'm ready to do it or I'm ready to send it, I'm going to send it. And I learned through experience, why have I not had anything back on that? Why have we not progressed on that? And it's a matter of just managing timing in communication. So I do think that's a really underrated one. I wonder, do you have any specific tips or strategies that you have when it comes to trying to motivate? And you mentioned, of course, it's not just individuals, but it's even entire, partners, organizational partners even. Any tips or tricks to try to motivate and get those partners to do their part? Anything in that aspect?
Yes, well, I will break it into two layers.
Okay.
If we talk about stakeholders engagement, it's extremely important that building those relationships with key directors to understand what their plans are, what their challenges are, what they're trying to achieve themselves, and coming to them with the partnering approach, trying to see what are the common points that we want to achieve, what we want to do could also serve their own objectives, and really working towards that and understanding what are their big projects throughout the year, how much resources it takes from them. I think that's important to be somehow considerate about those others' perspective in order to work together. On the team, I usually look at what people are really interested are in which field they're trying to progress, how they're trying to progress. And I often discuss with them, okay, if you are going to try to achieve a leadership position in ethics or in HR, what are the key skills that you actually need to acquire? And it's important to look at training, but on-the-job training is the most effective training you can get. So I really try to emphasize that and work with them as part of their career development, their work plan, what would be the most interesting project that could support their end goal and work backwards with them on those. So it can be a small project, it can be a small contribution on the bigger picture, but it builds on the experience. So working with the team on that specific aspect is critical to get things done, because then they're more motivated, and it's just in the zone of they can do it, they feel confident to do it, but they're a little bit challenged as well so that they can move forward.
And taking people through that kind of process, understanding what motivates them, where they want to get, roughly how long does that generally take to go through that? Is there a kind of general kind of range of time that it takes, that process?
Well, I would say that in general, most people know where they want to go.
Okay.
They usually step into a role thinking about what they can achieve in this role. First of all, maybe 2 or 3 things, major projects or major achievements, and they somehow have an idea of progression or not. Sometimes they also know that they don't want to go for a management position. They prefer to be experts. So I think these conversations usually take between 1 to 3 months. It depends also how much do we know each other, right? So getting to know each other in that respect can take 1 to 3 months. So they also have the time to think about what they're doing, what works well, what doesn't work well, what are the challenges. And I think that would be roughly the first 90 days in general.
Right. Yeah, 90, 100 days is a commonly used time frame when it comes to kind of setting up direction, setting up strategy, devising that kind of thing. And definitely, I think you can get the majority of that process done in that time, but it does still continue to build over time. There's no doubt that even after knowing someone for 5 years, you still continue to learn more about them over time. And of course, people change as well in time as well.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, as an HR professional, whether you find it easier to be a leader or more difficult. I mean, it's something obviously like, because we're HR people, so we talk about these things. We kind of we verbalize them. We really think about these things when it comes to how, as an organization, can be improved or what we need to do. But then that doesn't necessarily always translate to us as leaders and individuals. What's your take on that?
Being an HR leader is extremely challenging because there's a lot on your shoulders, being a supporting arm of management, as well as being very empathetic with staff. And in the process, you tend to forget yourself as a human being, as a professional, and balancing all of those requirements can be very challenging. And I have to say, very often I tend to focus on results because you have so much on your plate between strategy, day-to-day operations, other engagements. And it's really, really challenging to start thinking, okay, I am also a human being. I also need to be in a good place in order to be available for others and deliver this empathetic aspect of work. So it is a learning process, and it's definitely not easy on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Even I sometimes see online in HR forums about how, HR people often, like you say, are the ones who take the least holiday, focus the least on themselves because they kind of focus. Yeah, I say it's challenging. Would you have any kind of examples of a time when you have worked with an organization from a position of let's say, less effective kind of HR management, and there's things that you've been able to implement to get them to improve? I just wondered on that aspect, like you said, that we have a lot of agenda in supporting management. Sometimes there's things which just are never going to be improved, but I just wondered if you had some specific cases where you've had some good achievements in that aspect.
Yes, I think I can mention my work with peacekeeping, the UN peacekeeping. So there's prescription now, there's over a decade, where I took some leadership roles, particularly in Haiti. I was the chief HR officer. And I wouldn't say it's about improving, but it was already a chaotic setting where the mission had been there for 14 years with a lot of issues. There was earthquake, also some disease and all kind of issues. And I was sent there to downsize the mission, as well as help staff who will be impacted by the downsizing to find alternative jobs. And on the plane from New York to Haiti, there's about 5 hours, I asked myself, well, how can I help people find jobs in Haiti, which is one of the poorest countries in this hemisphere? What a tough challenge. And, going there, trying to downsize the mission as per the Security Council's resolution was a really, really challenging times. But in all that, you start thinking, okay, I need to get this done, but how can I do it in the most human-centered approach way? Helping staff to think about their future instead of focusing on them losing their jobs. How can they build on that experience, and what are the different ways to think about growing out of this process? So in that example, I worked with the team of the HR. We set up a task force and we developed some partnerships, of course, locally with, diplomatic missions, NGOs, as well as the UN volunteer group, which was in Bonn. We brought them here because they were looking for French-speaking people who wanted to go to Africa, for instance, as a UNV. And we also organized some entrepreneurship courses. How do you set up a business from the idea to, setting up the legal aspects of it, so that we could also give them some options to think about their future. And in general, I would say it's been really helpful because the downsizing itself went very smoothly, with also staff being more positive about it. I think 70% find alternative jobs. About 100 people were laid off, but found some alternative, but also left for Canada, for other countries, which was also an opportunity for them to move on. And I think my takeaway with this is that sometimes you really have to do some tough things. I mean, downsizing missions, it's extremely tough for the person who leads that process, but also for the persons affected. But communication and looking at it from an empathetic way can also turn into something positive for the staff who have been impacted. So I'm actually really proud of that work we did in Haiti, helping staff to move forward without too much grievances on the part of the UN at the time.
Yeah, and I mean, literally flying in to take huge action was definitely a big challenge, no doubt about it. I hope you're enjoying this episode. I just wanted to remind you to click subscribe if you haven't done so yet. By subscribing and following the podcast, you'll get each and every episode automatically pop up on your playlist every week, so you won't miss any. Thank you so much for being with us. Now let's get back to our guest. What is it that attracted you to the international organization sector? This is where you've spent your entire career. What is it why did you choose that path?
So on the personal level, I've always wanted to do something meaningful, something bigger than myself. I wasn't really attracted by the private sector. I think it comes from my personal background. My father is Cameroonian, my mom is French Vietnamese, so I grew up in a multicultural, multi-religious home. And my first internship was with the European Commission to the UN in 2004. And so every day I would go to the General Assembly, the Security Council, and I really felt like a fish in the pond. It felt like it was home. And, I loved working with people from different countries. And it was not just Europeans, just some of my schoolmates went to the European Commission. I wanted to be more with people from all over the world. And so that's what attracted me first. And I was lucky enough to join the UN in 2007, just after graduation. And it just felt like home all this time. And this passion of doing something, even at my very, very small, from my corner, I don't work on water improvement or road infrastructures, but I feel that I'm part of an organization that can create better lives for people. And that's very important to me.
And that has taken you to several countries in your work. What have you found to be some of the the best points, but also some of the worst points of moving internationally with your career?
So definitely moving around has been professionally and personally very rewarding. You get to work in different environments. You get to discover different countries. You're not just going on vacation. For instance, I went to Kenya, spent a couple of years there. It was wonderful to meet Kenyans, to see the country, to understand culture. So you get that flavor when you work as an expat. Obviously, it's very challenging to move around, whether you're alone or with family, but normally those organizations do what it takes to help you have a smooth transition from a paperwork perspective, sometimes helping with housing, and etc. So it is something manageable, right? And security is also there to help. However, moving around means that you really need a bit of resilience and agility in your thinking. Not everything will go at your pace, so patience, and of course, and sometimes patience is not my primary quality, so I'm impatient by nature, so I've had to learn how to be patient, understanding people's communication style. Working in Asia Pacific has been, from a communication standpoint, very different from Africa or the US or Europe. Adapting to that. And I don't say that I get it 100% all the time. I make mistakes. There are some faux pas. You learn from the process, but it is a conscious effort you need to make on a day-to-day basis and accept that things do not go your way all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the concept of global mobility is an interesting one. There was an article that really caught my attention a few years ago, which is the era of the Chinese expat. So basically, I think it was a piece by The Economist. It was saying, of course, for the last 100 years, the majority of expats, professional expats, have been coming from Western countries, predominantly Europe and North America. But increasingly, as the number and size of Chinese companies expand, especially as they have been going out globally, the instance of Chinese expats is becoming, whereas, actually Western companies have been steadily diminishing their amount of expats in recent times for various reasons. In terms of working in different countries, have you worked in different languages? So first of all, what's your native language, and what languages have you worked in around the world?
So my native language is French. Then I work and studied English, Spanish, Italian, some German. So no, I think I'll start again. I've had to work in German for a few months when I worked in Berlin. Right
Okay.
after university, I got a few jobs in Berlin, and then I quickly joined the UN. And even your laptop, the software in the PR company was in German. So you really have to sort of think and learn quickly. And then once I joined the UN, English was the primary language. Of course, French is an asset. And when I started moving around in Kenya, for instance, I learned some Swahili to also get to know people. I've worked in some Creole in Haiti, obviously. I also took some Korean classes when I was in Korea, some Tagalog in the Philippines. So
Okay.
I've worked in English mostly, but you have to
Right.
pick up a few things, survival, foreign language to survive around. Especially Korea was super challenging because there's not a lot of foreigners. Not many people speak English. It got better over time, but you really are in your bubble if you don't speak Korean.
And the reason for me asking that is that I'm curious about whether you perceived a difference in your way of working, or even a difference in your communication style when using different languages.
Yeah, well, I find that, for instance, I think there's a lot of bias about thinking about communication style in Asia, for instance. Most people would say they are indirect, they would not, speak up. But in Korea, for instance, I found that people are pretty straightforward. They're, especially if they have something to say, it's kind of straightforward. So, and we're in Asia, right? Whereas in Japan, it's also a very different way of approaching things. In general, I try to make an effort using understanding the language, also the blend, the language that has been influenced. Tagalog is also a mix of different languages. They're very culturally diverse, trying to understand how to sometimes even say a few words in their language can help people feel a bit more open to you. And I think that's generally what we can do, but also it's not really that easy to adjust to everyone every day. And I think it's also important to keep that balance between the two. They also have an opportunity to learn about another language, another culture through you as an expat. And it's important to sort of share that both ways, in my view.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned about agility being one of the key attributes to be a successful global expat, and I think language is a big part of that. I think, like you said, a little goes a long way to show that even if you're not getting fluent in that local language, you understand it is entirely different. And I guess the professional language used when working, in some countries, there is a big difference between that and what people use on a daily basis. And in other countries, there's not so much difference. And that, I think, in some countries leads to almost a natural kind of divide between the person's professional image and perhaps their, outside of work, or let's just say personal, natural image. And then when it comes to speaking that language, of course, then that can be a barrier to understanding. You can learn a few words, but that is not necessarily right in that particular context. And definitely when it comes to Korean, that was for me a big barrier. As soon as I understood that the language changes depending on what our relationship is, what our situation is, that became very kind of like daunting for me to be able to get it right from the start, but ultimately trying, and that often is appreciated by people, and I think it's something that English native speakers take for granted as well when it comes to it. Yes, everyone generally accepts it is the global language of business, but English native speakers don't often appreciate that means that people are not speaking their own language. And, you can be as fluent and comfortable and experienced in it, but ultimately it's still not your native language. So with that being said, which I think you said Korea, there were not so many foreigners around. Which was the area that you found, let's say, most difficult to work in?
You mean what area?
With regards to getting stuff done, with regards to kind of understanding how things work in that place, where was most challenging?
At the time at GDGI, we were on a culture change transformation. So joining the HR team, leading the HR team from that perspective, while being acquainted to a very, very different environment. A lot of Koreans within GDGI at the time was very challenging. And that's why it's also very important to invest time in building relationships. Getting stuff done is important. I guess it's the most important, the most visible outcome in a way. But building relationship with the people around you is extremely important in order to get stuff done. And in Korea, not speaking Korean, even some differences between Korean Americans and Koreans, because some Korean Americans had returned to Korea to live there. They also have a different perspective. So understanding people, where they actually come from, what's their real cultural background is key. I may be French, but I've lived abroad almost my entire life. Am I really French? Yes. For some people, that's maybe some visible behaviors that could be qualified as French. But in my heart, I feel more than a French citizen. So the passport itself even is no longer a guarantee that you have reliable information about somebody.
For sure.
And that's why it's important to really take the time to understand where people come from where they're coming from in general.
And you've been in the international organization area, and in most cases that is a very international mix.
That's right.
And it's almost kind of just, almost natural that the organizations are bringing together very diverse backgrounds to the table. That, of course, if we think about that holistically, is ideal, because you're getting as close as you can to diversity of thought to get the best outcome, but also brings its own challenges. Christel, thank you so much for being a guest today. It's been an absolute pleasure. If anybody wanted to reach out to you or get in contact, what would be the best way to do that?
I think you can just connect with me through LinkedIn.
All right.
And that would be the best way.
We'll share your profile on the show notes as well.
Yes, I'm very happy to get some new connection. So it's always nice.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your insights today.
Thanks for having me, Gordon. Good to see you again.
And thank you, everybody, for listening. It's been another fantastic episode of the Get Stuff Done podcast. If you have not yet subscribed, do make sure that you give us a follow. And if you would like to leave us a review, that would also help us to reach out to even more people on the Get Stuff Done podcast. Thank you once again. And remember, let's get stuff done.